Hi, I'm Jesse Dillon. This is my co-host.
Hi, I'm Priscilla Cohen, and this is Jesse's Office.
Today we're talking to Robert Greenberg, who invents biotechnologies. He talks about inventing the first bionic eye, essentially a cochlear implant for the eye.
How technology is allowing blind patients to see infrared, plus how he's engineering a functional human heart. But first, please subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch this and more episodes, or subscribe to Jesse's Office wherever you stream your podcasts. And feel free to leave comments and reviews, right, Jesse?
Yes, please. Please respond. We liked it. We like comments. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for thinking of me.
How did you get interested in the intersection of nerves and robotics, essentially? How did that, were you just a young person and got interested in that?
Yeah, I mean, it started with, at Johns Hopkins, I was in the MD PhD program there, and I met this retinal surgeon, who had this idea that we could make a cochlear implant for the eye.
Right.
And it kind of started with that. I was an electrical engineer by training, and then went to medical school at Johns Hopkins, and I had always wanted to combine electrical engineering and medicine, and it's kind of the nerves seemed like the most obvious place to do that. And, and so we had this, we worked on developing a artificial vision system using electrical stimulation to restore vision to blind people. And so that was kind of the dream project, and I came out here to LA to work on that.
How did you even, so where do you even start on that? Because, you don't have, you don't have universal principles for that to start with. And, a cochlear implant has a certain way of, it's not exactly hearing, right? It's
in the same way that our system was not exactly seeing.
Right. So how do you even start down the road of testing an idea like that?
That's a good question. So the hearing system, basically was taking sound from a microphone and delivering it to electrodes in the ear that would produce tones, and it was kind of, you would break apart sound into certain frequency ranges, and each electrode corresponded to that frequency range. And so it was really the same. We thought maybe we could apply that same idea to vision.
Right.
And so what you do is you break down an image into pixels,
right,
and then you take each pixel, put it to an electrode. At least that was the way we thought about it.
Right.
Each electrode would give you a corresponding spot of light, and these blind patients would hopefully see images. And then, if you did images over time, you'd make video in the same way that movies make.
But I have a question. How do you get to, if they're blind, how do they even get seeing that light? Like, is it just so extreme? Like, what is that?
No, it's a great question. So the patients that we started working with were patients with a disease called retinitis pigmentosa. So these patients had a retina that was damaged. So the retina is kind of like a layer cake, and you've got one layer of the layer cake in these patients was dead, but the other layers were okay. So we would put electrodes on the surface to kind of try to trick the brain into thinking that light was coming in to the back of the eye.
So they had partial sight already.
So they had sight at one time, and then RP is a horrible disease. The way they lose vision, it starts in their 20s, and they start having trouble seeing at night because the rods, the low light sensors go first. Mm-hmm. And they go to their ophthalmologist, and they're told, they think they need glasses. And they're told, you don't need glasses, you're actually going to go blind. And the way you're going to go blind is your visual world is going to close in on you gradually. Mm-hmm. Your field is going to get smaller and smaller over a period of 10 to 20 years until you go completely blind.
Right.
So a horrible diagnosis to get in your 20s. But it was a good disease to start with because we knew that the part of that retina was still intact. That we could still electrically stimulate the remaining retina. At least we thought we could.
Right.
How much
is that because do you start there, or as a clinical trial, because it means you're already starting to work with patients, do you have to start in cell lines somewhere else? Like, how do you even build up to that?
So when I was in grad school at Hopkins, we did two things. One is we did some really heroic experiments in in patients. And these were heroic for a bunch of reasons. They were heroic because these people were volunteering to go into the operating room and have someone under local anesthesia place a wire in their eye as close to the retina as they could. And so this was my advisor, the retinal surgeon, Jean Dewan. He would hold this wire within half a millimeter of the surface of the retina. And the patient is awake. Yeah, it's a hard thing to imagine, right?
Yes,
and these patients were awake, and and their eyes were moving. So, and if he touched the retina with this wire, he would damage it. Now, they were completely blind, so the risk was fairly low.
Yeah.
But and then we would ask, we would hook that wire up to a rack of electronics,
right,
kind of like the rack of electronics we see here, and then you'd ask the patient, "What do you see?"
Yeah.
And I'll never forget. I mean, the thing that got me hooked on it was this patient saw one spot of light,
right,
with one wire. The surgeon put a second wire in, and then he said, "I see two spots of light."
right.
And at that moment, I was hooked because I was
Right.
like, "You know what? This is going to work."
This is
Right.
going to work.
This was like 30 years ago now, almost. But it was clear that if you could do two to essentially pixels, right?
Yeah.
Then you ought to be able to do 1,000 pixels. It was just an engineering project at that point.
How much also, though, is for a person who's losing their sight in the imagination, the memory? So is some of it, kind of an interplay between your intellectual, your emotions, and then what's actually happening in the eye?
Yeah, that was a great question. I mean, one of the things we didn't know is whether the brain would have remodeled itself. So these patients, some of them had been blind for 10 years. And when we started stimulating again, we didn't know if everything was going to still be in the right spot. So like, if we stimulated an L, would they still see an L, or was it going to be rewired in some way? And fortunately, the very first patient we tried, we implanted a very crude device. It was only 4x4 wires,
Right.
so 16 pixels, if you will. And we stimulated the ones that we thought. Actually, we had it hooked up to a camera, and we put an L on the wall. And we asked. This is the very first time we had a patient hooked up to a camera, and we asked him, "What do you see?" And he starts shaking his head, and we're like, "It didn't work." And then he said, "All I see is a line that goes like this and a line that goes like that." He had forgotten the name L.
Wow.
Wow.
But he was able to see it. So the wiring was still there, but he didn't connect it to an L.
So how many in the bionic eye that you have now? How many lines across? And is it?
So the version that's commercially available today has a 6x10 grid, so
Right.
60 electrodes. And we've experimented with things, what we call virtual electrodes, where we try to kind of improve the quality of the vision by stimulating two electrodes the same so that maybe they would see a spot between it. It hasn't really panned out the way we had hoped yet.
So do you think eventually people will just be able to see like a natural?
I'm not sure. I think we thought RP was a great place to start, and it was. But one of the challenges is in RP, the retina does get somewhat distorted.
Right.
We know that now, and so that affects kind of the ultimate quality of vision you can get in that particular disease. One of the things we've started working on is something we call the Orion, where we bypass the eye completely and put the electrodes directly on the visual surface of the brain,
Right.
the part of the brain that normally sees, called the occipital cortex, which is in
Right.
the back of the head. And that we're able to do there. You're working with a normal brain, so I think the potential to produce normal vision someday is much higher. Actually,
Are we seeing in color or just black and white on this process?
great question. So the commercial version is black and white, but in the clinic, in Manchester, England, we tested half a dozen patients where we modulated the frequency. So it turns out if you've ever seen these black and white tops called Benham tops, that if you spin, you
Get
can
a
see
little
colors.
color. You get a little red.
Exactly.
Right? A little
Exactly.
bit of red, yeah.
Depending on the frequency of the black and white lines, you see different colors. So we tried that philosophy in half a dozen patients, and we were able to produce colors
Right.
in patients. So I think it is possible
that's so
to do colors,
interesting.
but the commercial version is still black and white.
Will you eventually be able to do? It's just thinking out. 50 years. Will you eventually be able to have devices that make a person see better than a human being sees now? Is it possible to
Bionic.
see beyond?
I don't know the answer to that. I would hope so. But I think one of the things that we have done already is we've taken infrared cameras instead of a normal visible light camera, we've used infrared cameras so that, and patients actually really like that because people light up, a hot stove will light up. And
Right.
so we think it's kind of an interesting, again, not available commercially yet, but so there's certainly things that you could do where people could see ultraviolet, they could see X-ray, they could see infrared. So you can certainly get kind of, quote, superhuman abilities. The hard part, at least today, is getting equivalent resolution. That, we have incredibly high resolution. We have
Sure.
100 million photoreceptors, 1 million ganglion cells, the wires that go back to the brain. So, replicating that level of precision is hard. I mean,
Although
it's hard.
you've had people using these devices for a long time now. Are you seeing interesting things that they are adapting in different ways than you thought they would? Like, are they using them exactly the way you thought they would?
For sure, they're not using them the way we expected.
Right.
Yeah, and people have been using these now over a decade. I think there were a lot of things that surprised us. I mean, the first thing that surprised us, our first 4x4 electrode version, which was implanted in half a dozen patients, only 16 electrodes. We never thought that was going to be useful to patients. We thought that was too crude.
Yeah.
It was really an experiment to see, will the concept even work? And what surprised us was people would scan their head, and so they're effectively increasing the resolution. So it's like if you take a paper tube
Right.
and look down it, you only get a small visual field, but if you scan around, your brain can integrate that and create a much better image and make it much more useful. And so that surprised us, that the patients just started naturally scanning.
So they're learning. It's machine learning, Jesse.
Well,
the brain
you mean
is.
the human being
Neural network,
learning.
yeah, the ultimate
No,
neural
the
network.
network is
Were they? Did they come back at you and say, "Look, you've done it this way, but if the resolution was a little higher, or gave me a little more view in the camera, like are there details that surprised you about how they wanted to interface with the technology?"
Yeah, so certainly what was important to them surprised us. So, I think as a sighted person, we thought resolution was kind of the most important thing, and reading would be important. But as it turned out, because of the development of computers that could read text for them and audiobooks and that whole industry, reading was actually pretty low on the list of what they wanted to do. Mobility and walking around was
Right.
much more important. And the number one thing really surprised us, and maybe it shouldn't have, but was interacting with other people. So being able to play ball with their grandchild.
Right.
Interesting.
I mean, something that,
or look
as
in the
humans,
eye, or just talk to people face to face.
Exactly. So being able to, right,
Yeah.
exactly. If you're blind, you don't know exactly where the person is,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
so they tended to, be facing a little
Yeah.
bit off, and we take eye contact for granted, but it's so important
yeah.
in a conversation. So they felt more connected to other people
That's
by
great.
being able to see the outline,
Yeah.
even though they couldn't necessarily see the facial features. They could talk to a person.
Right. I have a question for you. That moment where that patient said there's a line in a line, what did it feel like to have an idea, a dream, and then that emotional thing for you? Was it emotional? Like when, oh my God, it's working. And what did that mean to you?
That day was a super emotional roller coaster because it was, there was so much build up to that day. We had cameras, and there were about 30 people watching to what's it going to be like when it first turns on, and when it looked like it didn't work, it was incredibly devastating and embarrassing in a way, right? Because you had all these people we had brought in to see it, and then when it did work, it was like, it was yes, it's like it's the reason you do this. It was that aha.
What is
moment.
the
We're on the
reason
right
you
track.
do it, do you think, deep down?
There are a lot. It's complicated. I think for me personally, I love a challenge. I love making an impact on unmet kind of human clinical needs. It was the reason why I went to medical school. I was kind of an engineer at heart. I love tinkering, but I thought it was a higher goal to use that background to kind of help human suffering. I never get tired of meeting patients whose lives you
Yeah. I
change,
bet.
or whose families.
Yeah.
The family is often impacted more than the patient.
Yeah.
When you see what they're doing with artificial arms, artificial legs, you see cochlear implants, you see the bionic eye, and you're working on a human, replicating a human heart. What do you think the potential of these technologies are? Are we just at the beginning of this this new vista of new vision?
Yeah, I grew up in the '70s, so part of the influence to get into this field was the $6 Million Man.
Well, it influenced all of us.
Yeah, exactly. And so, could we get? I was fascinated by could we do that? And certainly with an electrical engineering background, I was like even more so. I was like, maybe we can do that.
Yeah.
At the Al Mann Foundation, Al Mann had this idea that maybe we could make the blind see, the deaf hear, and the lame walk.
Right.
And he got 2 out of 3.
Right.
We actually had a project for many years that was trying to reanimate paralyzed patients with a device called the Bion that would electrically stimulate.
Sure.
Turns out walking is incredibly complex.
Sure.
There's a lot of sensing.
But things are moving in that field, aren't they?
For sure, and it's still. I still believe it's possible. It's just that project was started in the 80s, 90s, and the technology wasn't quite there yet.
Right.
The control software wasn't quite there.
I mean, do you think that we'll be able to transfer our consciousness into silicon being? Is that important? Do you think that, what are the future of robotics? Does artificial intelligence affect this field in some way?
Yeah, so, one of the companies that we're working with at the Al Mann Foundation is Neuralink, Elon Musk's company that's trying to do effectively that. It's, I think where we are today is we're just now creating these interfaces to try to talk to the brain. That next level of where is consciousness, where does it even sit? How do you get to it? I don't think we really understand, quote, where it is. So I think we'll get there someday, but until we understand kind of a little bit better about how the brain
We don't know
works.
much about the brain. That's the challenge.
I think that's right. Yeah.
We did some work on at the UN Brain Initiative, and I forget exactly what we
The
were
Kavli Foundation.
Yeah,
yeah.
But we were talking to them about. I remember we were talking to them about brain research and what's going on around the world, and people are spending billions of dollars on it. And when the cameras were off, we asked one guy who was an expert who I won't mention, and he said, "Well, how long will it really take us to get an understanding of the brain?" He said, "Well, if everything goes right, 50 or 60 years."
And that means everybody working all
just
the
towards this
time.
one point.
Sure.
Although who knows if that's true.
Well, it's very difficult to predict out 5 years, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to see out 1 year, but people often will ask, where's this field going to be in 5 to 10 years? And it's so hard to predict because things do move in directions that we don't know.
Where do you think consciousness sits, by the way, just to go back? Do you have a feeling for that?
It's probably in the frontal lobe somewhere, but as an example, the technology or the learnings about the brain that we're using for this direct brain stimulator, this Orion for vision, that was work that was done in the 60s. So, it's taken this long to be able to take advantage of.
But was that like Timothy Leary dropping LSD? Was that part of all that to understand consciousness?
Not so much. Well, the consciousness part, I'm not sure. But the part of how vision is coded in the brain was work that was done at Harvard by Hubel and Wiesel. They won the Nobel Prize for it, and so that's. I would say it's, quote, well understood, but it's really not understood of kind of, we know how people put images together, but how we perceive that as part of the world and how it affects our reality and consciousness, I don't think we have any idea.
It's just too anxiety-provoking to really think about it, isn't it?
It's awesome, but it's I'd love to understand it. I think philosophers have wanted to understand that for a long time, since the Greek philosophers.
So, the device itself, how do you think about the aesthetics of what it looks like? Because it's like a person's walking around out in public with it, and they aren't necessarily going to look in a mirror and see it, right? So what responsibility do you feel like you have to think about that?
So early on, I thought the answer was none. I thought, gosh, they're blind. Who cares what it looks like? It can look, you can wear a helmet and it'll be great.
Right.
And I learned pretty quickly that wasn't the case. We were putting this on people who were vain and like everyone else, and they actually did care a lot about what this would look like. And we actually had one patient, the one that surprised me the most, there was one patient who decided not to get the retinal implant because of how it looked. Right. She was concerned about the glasses, and we had used, we had a young engineer who had this pair of Oakleys, and he, it was very kind of sci-fi looking, and he loved it, and that became kind of the first prototype. But to this woman who was in her late 60s, this just didn't fit kind of her view of what.
So did she chose not to do it?
She actually chose not. She would rather not see because of how she felt she was going to look. And then there were other people who liked the sci-fi look and liked that people would ask them about it. But in the end, there's actually a version that the company is going to be releasing this year that looks like a more normal pair of glasses, and the camera is invisible. It's very stealth, and so they look more normal. So I think it is important
So
that it
you're
look normal, and that it'd be easy to use too. That it'd be like putting on a pair of glasses.
So you're a researcher, you're the lead investigator on incredibly complicated technical exercise, and then all of a sudden you got somebody saying they're not going to wear it. And you have a company, you're trying to develop this as a product, now all of a sudden you need some social science expert who's going to, cool glasses designer, and like what happens on that day at the company when you're meeting with the board trying to explain you need to find more resources to work on the aesthetics?
To do the industrial design. I think in our case that was an expected kind of outcome that we would do the industrial design at some point. We were all kind of intentionally, let's just get it to work. We were going to make blind people see.
Right.
This was kind of a high enough goal and a hard enough goal that let's see if we could do it at all.
Right.
And we would do the industrial design later. I think most of our products, we actually do the industrial design much earlier. So an example, another spinoff from the Alfred Mann Foundation is a company, Axonics, that has a urinary incontinence stimulator. It stimulates the sacral nerve to help women who have urinary incontinence. And from the very beginning of that project, aesthetics were really important, and industrial design went into the beginning. And we knew it was going to be used primarily in older women, the same sort of demographic that we had issues with the eye stimulator, and this was going to be 80% of the population for this. So making it small, making it slick, making it as invisible as possible were all high priorities. And it's an important part. If people don't use the therapy, then you haven't done a good job. So.
But also it's even a deeper thing, because you need the feedback. Obviously, if the patient's not using it, the person, and we work a lot on a lot of health related stuff, and this idea of the patient centric, it's a different world. Like, you're making things to help other people. That's part of the vision and mission, and the dignity of the person. So I understand a person who doesn't want to. They don't want to. They want to be able to still walk around and feel like they're a full human being, or as much as possible. Do you take all that into account now and work on that psychological part of the story?
Absolutely. I think, the early focus groups with patients and are critical to the development of any product, and it's true for medical products as well. I mean, one of the debates in the field that often comes up is a lot of our devices are electronic devices that go inside the body. And there are two different approaches to that. One is a normal battery that runs down and you have to replace the device. And the other one is a rechargeable that you wouldn't. And so the advantage of the rechargeable devices is you don't have to get surgery. You can just
Will you
recharge
just plug yourself in?
They're inductively charged.
Wow.
So it's you kind of just put a patch on or depends on where the device is. But and so there's a contingent of people that believe rechargeable is better. Nobody wants to get surgery if they don't have to. But then there's another contingent that says, well, if you only have to get surgery every 5 years, but you can forget about the device and you don't have to charge it, and you don't have that worry that you kind of forget that you have the disease and you can live a more normal life, that may be an advantage. So there's this kind of...
That's almost an impossible question, because, nobody can predict for themselves whether they had surgery every 5 years, So how do you make a decision like that?
It's a tough dilemma. I mean, in the field, not just our company and our organizations, but the entire field is kind of wrestling with this right now. And you get a split. You get some companies go down the quote primary cell, it's called the non-rechargeable, and then other companies go down the rechargeable path. And I think the marketplace kind of shakes it out ultimately.
But also, we don't know yet what are the consequences of having a device implanted, right? We don't know what that might do to the body, to the cells. Do we, or
With
do we?
With these kind of devices, we do. I think the people have been implanting. I mean, this all really started with the pacemaker in the 1960s. That's when people started putting electronics in the body, and that was actually, it was with the sale of Pacesetter, which was Al Mann's first medical device company that the Al Mann Foundation was kind of founded. And so we do have maybe a 40-plus year history of implanting electronics in the body. And as long as we adhere to those principles, it's a challenging problem, though. There's two parts of the problem that are really hard. The body is like salt water. It's like taking your television and throwing it in the ocean and having it still work. Pretty challenging. And then so the body is attacking your electronics, but but to your point, the electronics, if they're not made of the correct materials, they can also cause harm to the body.
Right, or corrode.
But we've learned a lot. Yeah, we've learned a lot about what materials to use and how to build the devices so that they don't harm the body and they do last in this environment.
How do you, you started with this very specific thing about sight, and now you work on all sorts of things. Like, how do you come up with a problem that's worth, do you have a file cabinet full of possible problems, and then, what's the process by which you get attracted to a problem?
I'd love to say that it's a well thought out, organized process, but like most things, a little bit of it's happenstance. People will come to us with projects. One of the engineers on the team will read something in a journal and bring it to the senior leadership team. We have had, and we do have, sort of organized brainstorming sessions where we'll go through product ideas and vet them. But ultimately, it has to make it through a number of screens. It has to be something that meets our mission, which is high unmet clinical need. It has to be something where the market is sufficient to justify the development, because ultimately, if you can't sustain a company at the end of the day to manufacture these and provide them to patients, then nobody benefits. And there has to be an intellectual property path, so a what they call freedom to operate path, where there's not somebody else doesn't own all the patents to a particular approach, or if someone does, that we can license them. And so we'll license patents from universities that have developed a product. But if it makes it through all that screen, it has to be, someone has to pay for it. So it has to be something that we believe the government will pay for, or people will self-pay.
You yourself have 300 patents, yeah?
Something like that, yeah.
And so what becomes something where you go, yeah, I should spend the time and energy to patent this?
Yeah, patenting it's tough because I always kind of have mixed feelings about it. I think we've been fairly aggressive in filing patents on things we develop, and the benefit of having done that is it helps in the next step when you need to get professional capital investments for the spin-off companies, because then they can expect a return and they can protect the investment. So I'm a believer in patenting, and as far as what the right thing to patent is, it's hard to know, because we tend to patent the forest, because you never really know until you're done which ones were important. And of those 300 patents, there's probably 10 that are really important.
Right.
But when we filed the 300, I couldn't have predicted which 10 it was going to be.
So, you're talking about the process for a company to be developed. What's the key insight? Like, what's the moment? Like, we talked about in a simple way that with the sight, you were able to go, well, 4x4 screen, and they see the L. I'm onto something here, right?
Because even the 2 electrodes was the
Right.
2 spots were enough.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, what does it take for you? What's the key insight where you go, okay, artificial heart, let's double down
Yeah.
on this. What's the creative moment? Like, does that happen when you're in your shower? Does it happen when you're wandering around in the woods? Does it happen with a group of people? Like, how does that work? The creative aspect.
So there, I guess there's 2 parts. So there's the kind of the overall problem. Is this a problem worth working on? And I think those tend not to be aha moments. Those tend to be more thoughtful. Okay, what are the problems in making this a reality? Are these solvable problems? I think the creativity often comes in solving those problems. So in the case of the retina, there were many challenges. I mentioned the TV in the ocean problem. there was also the retina itself was like one-ply wet tissue paper, incredibly delicate. So now we need to interface with that long term over someone's life with a moving eye and a moving thing without damaging it. And so developing the technology to make that interface was challenging, and so those solutions tend to be the in the shower, on the hike kind of things where you come up with that thing that I saw somewhere else might be useful here, and kind of making those connections are super important. Another challenge we had with there was that TV in the ocean problem. We had to shrink it to the size of an eye. So that television, all the functionality of the television had to be now miniaturized. So in figuring out ways to do that are super creative, and we had a lot of brainstorming sessions with a lot of people. I'm also a big believer in brainstorming. I think there's kind of never one person that's going to come up with the idea, but through discussions and through back and forth, if you create the right environment, people will come up with the.
What is
answers.
the heart? The artificial heart? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it's a company based in Orange County, Bivicor, that we're working with, and the way their solution to this is, so people have tried to replace the heart for people that have failing hearts for a long time with mechanical solutions, and it's a very challenging problem because the biggest problem is the blood going through these artificial devices tends to clot, and then the device stops working, obviously. And their solution to it, and also a lot of the solutions are large. The body is incredibly efficient. The heart itself is an incredible pump for in a small space. So their solution is what's called a magnetically levitated solution. So they have this is similar to the monorail at Disneyland, but instead of kind of driving a car forward in a linear way, they have a rotary pump that spins and actually floats between two magnets. And so because of the way it's designed, the blood is able to kind of go through it without getting damaged. And it also has the other advantage is you have a electronic control system that you can simulate the heart, the pulsing of the heart, which some people believe is important for the.
Where are you in the
best of our-
testing? Like, where is that?
So it's in what I would call late stage animal testing, and so we're working with that company to get it to first in patient, hopefully by next year.
But when you go to the meeting, you're an expert on, the bionic eye, now you're sitting in a different seat. I imagine at this point you've been sitting in it for a long time. But you remember the first time that you went from, Johns Hopkins to sitting in a room judging a different person's idea, a different technology that maybe you are not a core expert in yourself, and how does your mind work? Because there's thousands of these companies, and you're just going to choose a few.
Well, the first thing I actually did after graduate school, so I was at the MD PhD program at Johns Hopkins, and actually my very first job out of there was working with the FDA as a medical officer, reviewing these devices, and I did that for exactly the reason you're mentioning. Is I was interested in learning as much as I could about what the cutting edge technologies were, which I figured would be at the FDA before the FDA. They were confidential, so nobody. It was and it was the things where they were applying for approvals or they were in clinical trials and so I got exposed to a lot of different projects there.
But even at the FDA, because I've actually served on one of those boards. You're looking at whether it's okay in a patient, right? It's physically going to be okay for a patient. Different than, hey, I'm going to take my risk capital and put it towards double down on this idea.
This project. Yeah, and I think it went from there to the Alfred Mann Foundation, and at the foundation, we were doing exactly what you were describing. We were making the judgments on where we were going to make investments, and we were developing products for. At the time, we had 5 projects that we were working on. One was an implantable rechargeable battery. We were working on next generation cochlear implants. We were working on, I mentioned this this device to try to reanimate people's limbs. We were working on a implantable EMG, so a muscle recorder, again to reanimate limbs, but using prosthetic arms. We're actually just now getting ready to spin that out. That project was more complicated than we thought it would be.
Is that pretty common that they're more complicated than they seem at
Almost
first?
always.
Yeah.
It always takes longer than you expect and costs more, and because it's like doing a home remodel. I mean, until you kind of open up the walls, you don't know really what you're going to find. And so,
how many times do you see great technologies and say, the technology's great, this is an amazing thing, but I don't think the team is strong enough to get this to the next level. They're not thinking about the path, the structures that it takes to get it ready for more financing. It doesn't, how often do you kill something because you just go, they're not even thinking about what it's going to actually take? And what are those things that it's going to take to go from being an amazing idea to actually being an amazing product?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say most of the time that's the challenge, and it's one of the gaps that we try to fill with the foundation, particularly when we're working with outside companies. There was a great top 10 list. So Al Mann kind of replicated Dave. The late night show Letterman's top 10 list,
Right?
And his top. Someone asked him once, what does it take to make a successful company or a successful product? And on this top 10 list, the idea was actually at the very bottom. A lot of people would think, oh, you just need a good idea, but the first 5 of the top 10 were capital, actually,
right?
And the reason is obvious to some people that it's really the capital that allows you to hire the next thing on the list, which is the people, and it's really the people that are going to make the difference in any project. And so, because all the problems and challenges that you come across are solvable with the right team, and the ability to attract capital is kind of around the right projects and the right IP and the right team, and so all of those become really important.
For people who don't know, can you just quickly tell us who Al Mann who he was?
Sure. So he was a serial medical device entrepreneur based in Los Angeles. He actually started in the 1950s in the aerospace business and created in his garage created a solar cell for satellites that was better than what was out there in the market. And he met a fellow actually at Johns Hopkins, coincidentally, who had a better pacemaker, had an idea for a rechargeable pacemaker. Back to the earlier idea that you wouldn't need to replace the pacemakers, which at the time were all batteries, and even today are still batteries. He developed a rechargeable pacemaker, but he developed many medical device companies. After the pacemaker, then pretty much every company after that, the foundation was the generator of the original ideas and the technology that then became the company. So some examples were cochlear implants became Advanced Bionics, a spinal cord stimulator became Boston Scientific's neuromodulation division, a insulin pump and glucose sensor became Medtronic's diabetes division, a company called MiniMed. So, just really cutting edge technology, and all of which were kind of incubated at the foundation, and then he went on to commercialize them.
And did he have a strong connection to Johns Hopkins, and that's how you got attracted to it?
He did have this history with Johns Hopkins, where this friend of his had originally suggested that he get into medical business from aerospace. And so, I had met the way I met him actually was I had met Joe Schulman, who was the CEO of the foundation from inception for maybe 30 years, and he mentioned that Al Mann was going to be in D.C. one day, and said, I really think you ought to meet this guy.
And did you have?
I didn't know who he was at the time, though. I said, yeah, okay, I'll go meet him.
And did you have an impression of him when you met him?
It's interesting. He handed me a copy of his talk, which had this top 10 list.
Right.
And at the time,
I mean, was Boston Scientific and Medtronic's already Medtronics?
No, they weren't yet,
Right.
and I was working at FDA at the time. It was in DC, and I don't think I appreciated or understood the importance of the talk or who he was or what he had accomplished at the time. So he seemed like, a down to earth, nice guy, and he said to me, I don't think you want to work for the government for the rest of your life. I think you ought to see what we're doing in California. Why don't you come out to LA and check out what we're doing?
You were already an inventor at that point. Was there a thing about methodology that you learned from him and from that thing that you rely on now?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to work closely with him for 20 years, and I learned a ton from him. I learned what mattered. I think probably the most important thing I learned was kind of what was most important, and
You mean the human element?
the human element in people, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think he valued not only the patients that he was trying to help, but he valued the employees that were making it possible. And one of the things that he would talk about is the person that cleans the toilets at our facility is as important as the top engineer in the company, because without that person, the top engineer can't do his work. And it was that kind of recognition of kind of the humanity and the importance of people in all of this that really made an impact on me early on in my career.
You talk about the $6 Million Man, and a lot of times we see technology painted in these dystopian futures. Do you watch science fiction, and do you think, wow, I wish there was a more fair view of what the future could be and the possibilities? Like, how do you think about science fiction?
I do like science fiction, and I don't watch as much as I would like, probably. But I'm a believer that the technology itself is not inherently evil or good, and I think technology will advance. There's no kind of stopping that, and so it's up to people kind of to choose what they want to do with it. I did make a conscious choice early in my career not to go into the military, for instance, though, and develop. I thought it was fascinating from an engineering technology standpoint. Developing nuclear weapons and things that friends of mine did go on to do. That to me was hard to find a good use of. It's hard for me to justify developing a nuclear weapon as one example. I think people who do develop it will often say, well, this is defensive and this saves lives, and I just couldn't get comfortable with that idea. So I think there are certainly some, for me, the medical technologies, it was hard. You can imagine a dystopian use of it, but I've always stayed pretty focused on.
Did you happen to see that show Chernobyl?
I haven't yet.
Oh, yeah.
I do want to see that.
I have a question for you.
It's on my list.
Yeah.
Once you get the prototype, the process of the clinical trials and working with people, what is that like when you transition from, we talked a little bit about early, but do you spend a lot of time working with people, and what is that experience? And just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part of all of this is working with the patients firsthand, and I think that's when we learn the most. I mean, we can do all the engineering we want on the bench, and we can do animal studies, and until you put it in a person and you have that conversation with the person and really watch the person use the technology, you don't really know where you stand. And so for me, it's really critical to spend time one-on-one watching the patient use it and listening to their experience. And it's rewarding also. It's also the most rewarding part. And you get these letters, these Christmas cards and letters from patients.
Yeah. Do you
great.
follow people over? Did they stay in touch with you?
They do. It's hard over a long period of time, but like with anyone, but for sure there were a lot of the early patients, especially that we were particularly close to and had over to our house. And
It's like once they're well, they no longer, the success is that they don't really ever come back because they don't have to come back and check with you about the thing.
that was one of the things that was interesting. We had the reverse problem. That's true, and we had the reverse problem with blind patients. Is we had a hard time finding the patients because they stopped going to their ophthalmologist.
Right.
Once the ophthalmologist told them they were blind,
Yeah.
why would you go back?
Right.
Yeah.
Like wasn't anything for them to help with. So.
That's always a challenge in trials, is just to keep them
Keep 'em coming
relationship
back.
going. And a lot of times people don't even keep any of the information afterwards, so you can't find them, and nobody thinks it's going to be important to follow up.
Right,
Yeah.
people
That's
move.
the-
People
yeah.
move.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah, it's complicated.
What is there something you still dream about, something really that you want to accomplish that you can speak about that you?
Yeah. No, I mean, we can kind of talk about any of the projects. It's for better or worse, the human condition is and disease is kind of a never-ending problem.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of when I got into this, I mean, even vision, I felt was a challenging enough problem that you could spend many people's careers trying to solve. I think one of the issues I'd like to tackle, and I'm not sure yet how we're going to tackle it, but is Alzheimer's. I think it's one of these. We've been struggling with the drug solutions haven't been working, and it's something that I've had firsthand experience with my family, and so.
So with something like that, like where do you even? We don't know whether it's an infectious disease. We don't. We know
Yeah, so how do you even attack it?
so little about it. Like, where do you? What's the thread? We don't. We've been doing research for 50 years on the
Yep.
threads and the plaque, and it turns out that may have nothing to do with it now.
Correct.
Latest research. So it's like, where do you begin? Like, where
Right.
do you sit down in your office with your team and say, we're going to fight this battle here?
Yeah, so a little bit is the brainstorming, but I don't have the answer for that one yet. So
Let us know when you.
Yeah, for
we're
sure.
We're counting on you for that.
I believe like all of these, it's a solvable problem. Though it's not, it's a knowable problem, but it's one that we haven't figured out yet.
A lot of times people lose sight of the fact of just how successful we've been, because if you look from the time you were starting with your ideas of the bionic eye to where we are now, it's an astounding level of progress. Yeah, I mean, how do you feel about medical progress in the time you've been watching it?
Yeah, I mean, when we started, it seemed like a crazy idea, right? People said it's a waste of time. In fact, I had classmates who thought this was nuts. Why aren't you why aren't you taking an academic position?
Or
This
go to
is
the
too risky,
military.
Yeah.
right? Or exactly, or the military. I think progress day to day feels slow, but when you look at it, certainly over decades, it's unbelievable, right? The technology, the cell phones that we carry in our pockets today,
Yeah.
are enabling things that would have seemed crazy just a decade ago. And my children can't imagine a world without an iPhone, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a fun time. It probably has always been a fun time if you think about the advancements of in technologies, but it does feel like it's accelerating. Like the internet in particular has allowed people to be closer, and that interaction between people. It feels like it's a fun time to be alive from a creative standpoint.
I heard a little bit of optimism there when you said we will kind of figure this out, which is a wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you feel that in general? Do you feel like these problems are solvable?
Yeah, I do. I think so. I think one of the important things, and Al Mann was particularly good at this, is realizing the difference between things. He had a physics background, so the difference between things that are impossible and the things that are possible. So there's some things that are physically impossible, and Elon Musk is another one who's really good at this. So understanding kind of on a basic level what is physically impossible and not worth pursuing versus what is physically possible and but difficult. So one example is when we were developing the eye implant. I mentioned the one-ply wet tissue paper problem. I mean, that took us several years where we kept in animals detaching retinas. The devices, we would put them in and it would detach. And I remember sitting around at a board meeting and one of the board members saying, I think this might be too hard. Maybe it's not solvable. And it was Al Mann at the time who said, this is hard, but it's not impossible. This is it's a mechanical system. There's nothing inherently, physically impossible about this. Rob, go back to the lab and figure it out.
So knowing when to continue and knowing when to give up.
Right. Knowing when it's physically, and even when to start on a problem. I mean, there's some problems that making water into gold is probably an impossible problem, not worth pursuing. But ones that are possible.
How about just making water? Because we don't have enough of that apparently. Can we do that?
That's probably possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have enough energy.
Yeah.
You gotta have an energy source, but yeah, it's possible. So I think knowing the right, figuring out which problems, but the ones that are physically possible, I think are doable and are worth pursuing.
And there's probably more of those than we know.
There are probably more of those than we know.
Well, thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
This is great.
Really
Thank you
My
for sharing all
pleasure.
this stuff.
Thank you guys for
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah,
What
great.
you're doing. What do you like to
Such
do
a-
for fun, by the way?
I actually enjoy this work, but obviously spending time with family and hiking is a lot of fun too. I'll tell you a funny anecdote. When I applied to Johns Hopkins, I was interviewing with a Nobel laureate who at the time I didn't know was a Nobel laureate. And he asked me that question. He asked me why I wanted to go to medical school, actually. So I was an engineer undergrad at Duke, and I said, well, I think it'll be fun. The guy, it was Ham Smith was his name. And he said, Rob, playing tennis is fun. Medical school is not fun.
Yeah.
And I saw him actually after the first year of medical school, and he saw me in the hall, and he said, he remembered, he said, Rob, so was it fun?
Yeah.
I said, actually it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
thank you. This is great.
Thank you.
My pleasure, thanks.
Thanks for watching or listening. Don't forget to subscribe. Click here for the next episode and respond. We really want to hear from you.